All right. Hope everybody is well. Welcome to what seems to be our weekly New York Giants Preservation Society meeting. Today we are honored to have John Rosengren speaking, just to get you updated on some news. Next week on the 19th, we'll have George Greger, another author who did a whole book on giant lore in verse. And then we're going to take a break for Thanksgiving. And then Anita Aroka is going to be scheduled on December 3rd. She wrote a brand new book about the Women's Professional Baseball League from a league of their own. So, guys, that, when your wife complains to you that you're never around on Thursdays, might be a good day to invite them. Maybe they'd appreciate that. On the 17th, we got Bob Kendricks from the Negro Baseball Hall of Fame. So, and I'm working on Tom Rigney for the week before then. There's been no definitive answer on that yet. So, before I introduce John, the book he'll be talking about is The Fight of Their Lives between JUAN Marichal and John Roseboro. Some of you might know I was a teacher. I wrote a whole trial on this incident, and the lawyers debated it, and Roseboro came back and was suing him. It was really well received. So what else could I tell you? Steve Summers mentioned us 2 nights ago in the overnight on WFAN about Mays and McCovey and how much he loved McCovey, and he's always getting emails from our esteemed group, and he was very proud of that. I wrote him, thanked him, and he wrote this beautiful thing back to me. So, John, before I turn it over to you, just so you're aware of me, my first game was a game that actually Marichal pitched in 1969. It was a Met-Giant game at Shea Stadium. Marichal was pitching not into the 14th inning, and I had to go to the bathroom. It was 0-0, and my father would not take me to the bathroom. He refused. And my older brother, who's not with us anymore, he wound up having to take me. And we're in the stall in Shea Stadium, bottom of the 14th, and you hear this roar. My brother grabbed my arm and pulled me out. And as soon as we got out of the, out of the hall there, Tommy Agee is running around the bases, and the Giants lost 1-0, and my brother never let me forget that moment. So, John, great seeing you. Thank you so much for coming aboard tonight. The floor is yours. Ladies and gentlemen, John Rosengren.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thanks for inviting me to speak. I appreciate it. Thanks to all of you who are attending. It's great to see this kind of turnout, and nice to be able to hang out with some baseball fans on a day when it snowed here in Minnesota, and baseball seems very remote right now. So I thought, rather than asking you to look at my ugly mug while I talk, I'm going to show some slides, and then we'll open up the questions. I'll come back. You can see me. But no, you'll hear my voice, but you'll just be able to look at something else. So,
John, I think if I remember what to do, I'm going to try to give you the screen.
Okay, yeah, I just tried to click the share screen, and it said host is disabled.
It says, all right, security, share screen. I think that will allow you to do that now.
There we go. Okay.
Does that work for you?
Yes. Let me.
Perfect.
So can you guys see that now?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. And maybe, do you also see me on the side?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Oh, this is perfect. I like this. God, isn't Zoom wonderful?
John,
I know we're all...
John, the beauty of this is that we had 3 or 4 meetings a year in Manhattan, and some people would show up. It'd be hard to get guests. Now we have more people showing up, and now we have people from Minnesota talking to us, in California and Arizona. It's a beautiful thing.
It really is. It's like, I'd rather be in person, but this is allowing us to do things like, like this, where we're reaching across the country and seeing each other. So this is fantastic. All right, so what I'm gonna talk about tonight is based on this book I wrote and what I learned when I was researching it. You've all seen this photo, I'm sure, and are familiar with this incident. And I want to give you a little more of the backstory of what led up to this moment, and then what happened afterward. And I'm sure you know parts of it, but you might learn something as well. So here we are, August 22nd, 1965. Juan Marichal hits John Roseboro over the head with his bat. He opens up a 2-inch gash in Roseboro's scalp and sets off this 14-minute brawl that forever links these two men. And everybody who was there, players, coaches, fans, broadcasters that I spoke with, umpires, they could not believe what they just witnessed. I mean, this has never happened before. It was so unusual that someone would hit another player over the head with his bat. And everyone was asking, what happened? Well, Juan Marichal was not the kind of guy to go around hitting people over the head with his bat or with clubbing people in the head. He was born in a poor Dominican Republic village. He had a thatched roof house with no indoor plumbing. His father died when he was 3 years old. He was raised by his mother, who was a devout Catholic. He ended up falling in love with the national pastime, baseball, of course, and had the talent to pitch for the national team. The Giants signed him, and he made his major league debut in July 1960, pitching a one-hitter that pretty much announced his arrival as one of the next greats, one of the next great Giant pitchers. It was one-hit shutout. So in 1965, he established himself as a regular 20-game winner, an all-star, annual all-star. And so that's who he was on the, as a baseball player. But he was also, as you see in this picture, he was a happy, gentle soul. And those of you who've had the chance to meet him, I saw some of the pictures going around. He strikes me, I've met him only later in life, and he strikes me as this gentleman, this Latin gentleman. He carries himself like that. But his nickname was Laughing Boy when he was a player, for his cheerful disposition. And he had this easy smile. He maintained his Catholic devotion that his mother had raised him with. He prayed daily to the Blessed Virgin Mary. He recited the Psalms daily. And he went to Sunday Mass, even when the team was on the road, he'd seek out a church where he could go to Sunday Mass. And so that was Juan Marichal in 1965. John Roseboro was also not the kind of guy to go around picking fights. He was a competitor, very competitive guy, but he was also a kind guy. Roseboro was born in Ashland, Ohio, a small town about an hour drive southwest of Cleveland, to a working class family, one of the few black families in a town of about 12,000. And he was an excellent athlete. He actually got a football scholarship to a small college in Ohio, Central State College. And while he was there, he was working out with the baseball team, and a Dodger scout noticed him and signed him. So he definitely liked playing sports more than school. So he was delighted to be able to play for the Dodgers organization. He got called up in 1957 while the team was still in Brooklyn. And of course, the Giants still in New York at the Polo Grounds. But the next year, after Roy Campanella's car accident when he was paralyzed, Roseboro became his successor and proved himself that year to win the starting job. He also, he earned the respect of pitchers with his defensive skills and his pitch calling. Those were his strengths. He wasn't a great hitter, though he came through at times in the clutch, but he was an excellent defensive catcher. And because of that, Sandy Koufax had him as his catcher of choice, and he ended up catching a couple of Sandy Koufax no-hitter. So that was him as a ball player. As a person, I mentioned he was a kind guy. His teammates liked him. He was introvert, but he also had a really quick wit. And ironically, his teammates named him Gabby, as you would expect, right? Just like the short guy becomes Moose and a tall guy becomes Shorty. Anyway, so that was John Roseboro. It's important to understand this incident between these two players within the context of the rivalry. And I know I don't have to explain this to you. I'm sure you all suffered some heartbreak a few weeks ago when the Dodgers won the World Series. But this is the most storied rivalry in all of professional sports. I'd say in all of sports, the Dodgers Giants is the most storied rivalry. It's the most bitter rivalry. It goes back to 1889. And it seems these two teams have always been in contention with each other or intent on knocking one another out of the contention. And it's, this rivalry has been soiled over the years by beanballs, brawls, and bad blood. Well, when they moved to, the two teams moved out to the West Coast, I think it only intensified the rivalry, because what you had then was these two teams, the rivalry is fueled by the innate differences and antipathy between their two host cities, Los Angeles and San Francisco. So the atmosphere was charged when these two teams met. Whenever they met, and that back then it was 22 times a season when you just had a single division for the National League. Think about that. Teams, they hardly play each other, more than 8 times a season now, but 22 times a year they play. And so there was a lot of time for that rivalry to develop. And Maury Wills said, whenever it was war all the time. So in 1965, there was a tight pennant race between the Dodgers with their extraordinary pitching. They had Sandy Koufax, Don Drysdale, Johnny Padres, and Claude Osteen. And the Giants had the big bats, Willie Mays, Willie McCovey, Jim Ray Hart, and Jesus Alou. So it was, this classic rivalry, pitching versus great hitting. The Dodgers led most of the way that season, but the Giants were constantly close. And the tension between the two teams showed itself early that season. In April, the first month of the season, Don Drysdale knocked down Willie Mays twice in a game. And of course, this was more common back then, more common today, more common than today, pitchers throwing hard inside. But Marichal thought Drysdale had gone too far. And so, and he probably had. Drysdale hit more batters during his 14-year career than anybody else. He hit 154 batters. That's a record. Still stands today. Nobody's hit more batters than Don Drysdale. So the second time he knocked down Mays, Marichal thought he'd gone too far and declared, "This stuff has got to stop. I'll do something if Drysdale continues. Next time he comes close and I'm pitching, he'll get hit, and real good too." So Drysdale's response was, "Go ahead, Juan, bring it." That gives you a sense of the tension between those two teams in 1965. Well, that was a summer of fury, as you'll remember, 1965, in society as well as on the baseball diamond. The year started with Malcolm X getting murdered in February. The next month, police in Selma, shown here, turned a march for voting rights into Bloody Sunday. The U.S. sent its first troops to fight in Vietnam, and they launched an aerial bombing campaign there. So the turbulence in society and the world was also affecting Juan and John personally. Marichal was on edge from early in the season. The Civil War broke out in the Dominican Republic on April 28th. President Lyndon Johnson sent 20 troops down to the small Caribbean island, and Marichal watched scenes on television of the bloodbath fought out in the Santo Domingo streets, worried about his family's safety, literally worried sick. He developed a sinus infection that troubled him the entire season. And the war dragged on the entire summer. And the Civil War in the Dominican Republic, it frayed his nerves. That game in April when he threatened Drysdale was just the day after the war had started. So no doubt he was feeling rattled by what had happened back home. And, that we were seeing that on the field during games. In August, as the war and the season wore on, he uncharacteristically barked at the official scorekeeper over a decision that didn't go his way. In another game shortly afterward, he argued heatedly with the home plate umpire over the strike zone. And this was very uncharacteristic of Marichal to have these sorts of public disagreements with people. Willie Mays later told the New York Times, "I really don't think Juan should have been playing at all. He was pretty strung out, full of fear and anger, holding it all inside." Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, John Roseboro has also been put on edge by events. These are scenes of the Watts riots taking place that summer, August 1965. So Roseboro is a black man living in South Central Los Angeles, saw this going down a week before his encounter with Marichal. And, you know, there's no escape when they're playing baseball from this. When they're at Dodger Stadium, they could see the smoke from rising from Watts and the burning buildings and stuff. And it was so troubled Roseboro, he wondered why they were still playing baseball at a time like this. And one night, after hearing demonstrators plan to march down the street outside his house, he sat up all night on the front steps with a loaded gun, prepared to defend himself and his family. And I was thinking about that this summer because I lived 3 miles from where Derek Chauvin put his knee on George Floyd's neck. And those riots taking place were right around us. And there was one night when there were rumors that the rioters were going to come into our neighborhood. And I tell you, we were all on edge. And I don't own a gun, but my brother-in-law actually does. And he offered to come sit up at our house and you know, keep watch. And I had this understanding of what John Roseboro must have been going through. I mean, it was intense. And, you know, these events are going on out of your control and you just feel like, what the hell, you know, and society's breaking down and anything could happen. So Roseboro was on edge. Turned out that night the the demonstrators took a different route and they didn't go up by his house, but you can understand how jittery he was and how jangled his nerves were. So that set the stage for a critical 4-game series late in August between the Giants and the Dodgers at Candlestick. The Dodgers had a slim lead going into the series. They won 2 of the first 3 and increased their lead to 1.5 games. So the 4th game offered this marquee matchup. You've got the Dodgers ace, Sandy Koufax, against the Giants ace, Juan Marichal. So basically you have the best right-handed pitcher in baseball, Juan Marichal, against the left arm of God. In the first inning, Marichal put 2 Dodgers in the dirt pretty quickly with inside pitches. Koufax responded by throwing a ball over Willie Mays' head. The ump warned both teams, you know, no more, or I'm going to kick the pitcher out of the game. So when Marichal came to bat in the bottom of the 3rd inning, baseball code, of course, called for Koufax to throw one high and tight at him to deliver a warning, you know, enough. But the Dodgers, of course, didn't want their pitcher ejected in the 3rd inning of a critical game. So instead, John Roseboro told Koufax he would take care of it. So first pitch is a curve outside. Marichal kind of breathes a sigh of relief. Second pitch comes in. John Roseboro deliberately drops the ball, stands up out of his crouch, and he throws it back just right past Marichal's face. Now imagine this, Marichal's batting, right? He sees the pitch come in, and then he relaxes for a moment, and suddenly this ball whizzes by his head from 3 feet behind him. He said it was so close that he felt it nick his ear. John Roseboro had a really good, strong arm. A ball coming, you know, if that ball had hit him in the head, Marichal would have, you know, could have killed him. Certainly would have knocked him out. Well, Marichal is understandably frightened, angry, turns to confront Roseboro, sees Roseboro coming at him in full gear. And so Marichal takes a step back and brings his bat down in defense. Well, we know, you know, it's not, no matter what happened, that doesn't excuse Marichal hitting Roseboro in the head with his bat. But I think it helps us understand why he responded the way he did. because of the danger and fear he felt. At any rate, that moment intertwined these two men forever. So this is the way people viewed this event, right? These are the photos. This is a photo from Life magazine. This is a photo that was widely circulated, but it shows Marichal, the villain, Roseboro, the victim. And Roseboro played the part. He actually ended up suing Marichal and said his punishment should be 10 minutes in a room alone with me. Marichal's actual punishment, what National League President Warren Giles meted out, was a suspension of 8 playing dates, which turned out to be over 12 games, and $1,750, which may not seem like a lot of money right now, but it was a record amount back then, the most ever levied against a player to date. Plus, Marichal had to carry his guilt with him. This was not the kind of act that he could justify to himself and others. And of course, he was excoriated in the press for his action. Among the other consequences were the Giants lost the pennant to the Dodgers, and some blamed Marichal's suspension. The team faltered without its ace during those 12 games he missed down the stretch. And when he returned that season, he didn't seem to be the same pitcher. He seemed afraid of throwing inside, which left him less effective, or rendered him less effective. Meanwhile, after winning the pennant, John Roseboro and the Dodgers went on to win the 1965 World Series against my Twins. But there were other consequences for Juan Marichal. The incident with him cast as a villain tarnished his reputation and kept him out of the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. He had the numbers to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I mean, consider, he was the dominant pitcher of the decade. Juan Marichal, during the 60s, won 191 games. That's 27 more than Bob Gibson, 33 more than Don Drysdale, and 54 more than Sandy Koufax. So pretty impressive run during the 1960s for Juan Marichal. But his instant of unrestrained rage cost him. In the first year he was on the ballot in 1981, he received only 58% of the vote from the baseball writers. Of course, he needs 75. He only got 58%. Gibson got in with 337 votes to Marichal's 233. The next year, 1982, Marichal again fell short of the number of votes he needed for induction. So he did something drastic. And I'm gonna read that section from my book to you because I explain it better here than I can summarize it. Juan Marichal had not campaigned on his own behalf. He had simply waited to see how the writers voted. But as the year 1982 wore on, he decided he might be able to influence the outcome. So he called John Roseboro at Fouch, Roseboro and Associates. This was the public relations firm that John and his wife had set up. "Johnny, I need your help," Juan said. Johnny knew how Juan had suffered at the hands of the press in the immediate aftermath of their first fight, and still now, 17 years later, with every article written about that day and every vote withheld by the baseball writer members, that bothered him. The guilt, Roseboro felt, for his part, had never completely left him. Here was his chance to let Juan know he wasn't angry at him any longer. "Okay," he said. They came up with the idea that Johnny would play in Juan's charity golf tournament in the Dominican Republic. The public gesture would provide opportunities for press coverage in the Caribbean and the United States. Johnny and Barbara agreed to conduct their most heartfelt public relations campaign. In December, Johnny, Barbara, and Barbara's 10-year-old daughter, Nikki, flew to the Dominican Republic. The Marichals welcomed them warmly to their Santo Domingo home. John and Juan, who had competed against each other and twice occupied the same clubhouse at All-Star games, had never really talked to one another meaningfully. Over meals and at poolside, the two ex-ball players who seemed so different on the surface, one Latin, the other American, one an extrovert, the other an introvert, one a devout Catholic with 6 children, the other married divorcee with a stepdaughter, realized they had much in common. Excuse me. They shared an abiding love of baseball, competitive spirits, and an appetite for laughter. They both came from humble beginnings, had endured racism, and had experienced success. And, surprise of surprises, they enjoyed one another's company. The golf tournament was a success. Juan and Johnny gave a press conference and posed for photos. They said that the sports writers had made too much of their altercation in 1965, that it had simply been a game that had gone bad, and that they were not enemies. Johnny pointedly said that day should be forgotten and advocated for Marichal's election into the Hall of Fame. The Dominican papers recorded their remarks and published the photos. The message back to the United States in general, and the Baseball Writers Association members in particular, was clear. We're friends now. You can't hold the past against us any longer. But those 7 days in the Dominican Republic proved far more significant than a choreographed publicity stunt. Juan had finally delivered a personal apology to Johnny, and Johnny had deliberately forgiven Juan. Their interaction relieved both men of the weight that had burdened them for 17 years. Johnny and his wife and daughter, they really forgave me, Juan said. That took a big load from my body. I knew I had made a mistake, and it had been hard for me to live with that on my conscience. When Johnny forgave me, I was so happy. So, in 1983, Marichal's third year of eligibility, the baseball writers finally gave him the votes he needed. And after he got the word, one of the first calls he made was to John Roseboro. I'm going to Cooperstown, he said, and choked up. Thank you. Thank you. And Johnny cried too. That was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. The two men saw each other from time to time at old-timer games, at memorabilia shows. When Johnny managed in the Dominican Republic, Juan drove across town to visit him and watch him play or watch him manage. So I don't have to tell you, how these times today reflect the fury of the 60s, how polarized we seem to have become, how the public discourse trends toward the mean and nasty. I know you read the papers, you watch the news, you know what's going on. It seems too often we're quick to see the bad and dismiss the good in others with whom we disagree. So in that context, I find it especially heartening to be able to tell the story of Juan Marichal and John Roseboro, of the way they managed to transform their infamous altercation into an occasion of reconciliation. So on July 31st, 1983, at his induction into the Baseball Hall of Fame, Juan declared that he and Johnny had become friends. He thanked Johnny for his forgiveness and support. And once again, the day belonged to both of them, like it had 18 years earlier on that fateful August afternoon. Only this time, they had changed their story from one of fear and violence to one of forgiveness and love. And that, I believe, will be their legacy. So there you are. That's my story. And I'm sticking to it. But now I'd be glad, whoops.
John, let me ask you a quick question.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to find my, okay, yeah.
I'm sure a lot of the members would want a book. Should they go through Amazon or should they go through you, or talk to us?
Well, there's several things. You can go through Amazon, or if you'd like a signed copy of your book, you can go here to my website. Whoops, there, johnrosengren.net. And once you're there, there's on the front page, excuse me, there's a little thing that says buy personalized books right there on the front page. So if you'd like to buy a personalized book, click that and it'll ask you who you'd like me to inscribe it to and everything. And you can buy a book there and I'll sign a copy and send it to you. So
I'm sure
either
that
way.
makes a nice holiday gift about this time.
Oh yeah, for your spouses, your family members, your children, your neighbors, the postman, the guy at the grocery store has been so friendly during COVID. No, but I'm happy to buy or sign copies for you. And also now, delighted to answer your questions and hear your comments.
Yeah, and I got one question. Different circumstances, of course, but this relationship is kind of similar to the Thompson-Branca relationship, where so-called enemies later became, friends for both for different reasons. But to me, that struck tonight.
Right. Well, here you have, that's another one of those moments in baseball that forever linked those two guys, right? You could hardly talk about Ralph Branco without the home run he gave up to Bobby Thompson, right? And there's that famous photo of Branca sprawled on the steps, just defeated and demoralized. And of course, Bobby Thompson skipping around the bases. And there was so much more to their lives, but it's like we remember each of them for that particular moment in their life and how they're connected. So I suppose Branca could have resented Thompson forever, but it was heartening to see them warm up to one another and become friends, or at least friendly with each other later in life.
So another example of that is Mookie Wilson and Bill Buckner.
Yeah, and I think that was I think not as many people remember Mookie Wilson's name with that play, right? When they see the ball go through Buckner's legs, they're not thinking of Mookie Wilson, but classy of Mookie Wilson to be generous with Buckner and not credit that for the Red Sox loss.
So John, didn't the sports press call Juan the Dominican dandy? Did you know that?
I'm sorry, what's that?
They used to call Juan the Dominican dandy in the press.
Right, yeah, that was part of his nickname, and it fit. I think, like I said, he's this Latin gentleman and well dressed, has style, and So I find him a very charming guy. I talked to him several times in my research for this book, and then when I was in Cooperstown, various times I'd run into him, and he was just always a pleasant guy.
Yes.
John,
I have a picture of him and me in the street there at Cooperstown. He's showing his one of his World Series rings. Steve, you have that picture, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
John, what did some of the giant players tell you when you did your research? You talked to teammates, did you not? And what did they divulge anything that was that you could pass on to fans like us about what some of them on the field and in the dugout may have said about that?
Mostly they spoke in terms of being shocked and of being just sort of stunned at first. Like, did I just see that? Did that just happen? I didn't get a chance to talk to Willie Mays. I would have loved to have talked to Willie Mays. I mean, you've probably seen the picture of him with his hand on, again, this ran in Life magazine, but he's got his hand on Roseboro's chest protector, and he's helped lead him off the field. And so Mays helped diffuse that brawl, because he and Roseboro were friendly with one another. And so he helped get Roseboro out of there. Because, I mean, as you can imagine, Roseboro was really angry and ready to, tear Marichal apart. So that was about all I can tell you about that.
John, hello. I commend you on your research. And to paraphrase, Marichal was the pitcher of the decade with 191 wins. Do you think that prevented Juan Marichal from ever receiving a Cy Young Award?
I think what prevented, no, I don't. I think probably what prevented him from winning a Cy Young Award was Sandy Koufax and Bob Gibson. It's like Marichal would have a great year, and then Gibson would have a 1.12 ERA, or Koufax would win 28 games or something. I mean, it's like he just had, there was such great pitching during that decade that Marichal just always seemed to be a little behind in the numbers. I guess, yeah, it's almost like Darvish. He may have had a little better numbers this year, but losing out to Bauer, the Cy Young, I'm sure that's smarts, because Darvish pitched a great year, but Bauer just a little better year maybe.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't there one Cy Young for most of that time? Not two. Somebody with Rich. Is that right, Rich Rogers?
I think you are, but I can't say with absolute certainty.
Okay.
Yeah, somebody could Google that to find out at what year did they start delivering two? Because
later.
I mean, it was a big, to win the Cy Young Award when there's just one. That was pretty big achievement. Of course, there are fewer teams, fewer pitchers, but still, that was pretty impressive to be the best pitcher in Major League Baseball.
John,
the Cy Young Award was first awarded in 1956, and I think for the first few years there was just one winner, not two.
It was a long time.
There was
Bruce, did you have a question, Bruce?
Yeah, how badly was John Roseboro injured? Did he require hospitalization?
Well, he went to the doctor, got stitches. I think it was, I can't remember the exact number of stitches, like 14 or something, but it was a 2-inch gash. So that was significant. Also, we didn't really talk about it at the time, but it was, he was concussed. And, of course, we didn't know as much as we know now about concussions, but that certainly affected him. But other than that, those were his injuries. And he was lucky, I think. He was wearing a mask, right? And Marshall's bat came down. I think he glanced the mask and which absorbed part of the blow, and then the side of his head. And so obviously it could have been much, much worse. Hey, I just put my email address too in the chat section if you're interested. That's how you find me.
John,
how would you? Sorry, go ahead.
Perry, go ahead.
This is Perry. Hi. I'm just wondering, within the context of what you just told us about, the genesis of the bad blood between them, and it sounds to me like Roseboro initiated the fracas. But do you have any sense that the refusal for the writers to vote him into the Hall of Fame for so long had anything to do with racism or something against Latin or Black players or something like that? I'm very curious, because of all the discussions going on now about racism and how.
Absolutely. I believe that was a factor.
You did.
And probably more with stereotypes that the American public had at the time against Latinos. Excuse me. Yeah. And I go into that rather in depth in my book about I'm sure you've all heard how Roberto Clemente was treated by the press, excuse me, in the late 60s, early 70s. But there's being called Bobby when he wanted to be called Roberto. His name was Roberto, not Bobby, but they're anglicizing it. And there were cartoons in the sporting news that use phonetic spellings to capture the accents and broken English of a lot of Latin players. And it was just, looking back on it now, it just seems so cruel and so insensitive and so just blatantly wrong, right? But it was almost like Archie Bunker was drawing these cartoons, and that the Archie Bunker attitude prevailed in terms of these stereotypes going unchallenged. But part of that stereotype was of the fiery temper that the Latins had. Yeah, and you saw that picture of Juan Marichal. That was not characteristic of him. He was the laughing boy. He was a happy guy. He would play practical jokes, like toss a lit firecracker at someone and he'd jump. And he was a fun-loving, happy guy. He was competitive, sure. But I think in that moment when he hit Roseboro over the head with a bat, he was reacting more out of fear and anger than he was out of this fiery Latin temper. But of course, that's how it got cast. And,
it was a crime of passion. Yes.
Yeah, speaking of which, there was a previous incident with Ruben Gomez and the ice pick. Are you aware of that, John?
Right. Yeah, I mentioned that in my book as well.
Yeah,
Oh.
and he ran in the clubhouse and over to the Coca-Cola cooler and grabbed an ice pick, and my dad stopped him. My dad was a clubhouse manager at the time.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
But,
that,
you look at like Sal Magley, right? He
How
had
did your father
reputation-
stop him, Eddie? I mean, did he literally disarm him, or?
yes, he did. My dad knew all the players intimately. Ruben stopped it.
Eddie Logan.
That's what I remember.
That's fantastic.
Sure.
Anyway, I was going to say, if we go through the list of all the guys who've been violent on the baseball field, the majority of them are not Latin. The majority of them are Caucasian.
Do you have a picture in your book of the statue in front of the stadium in San Francisco of one? Is that in the book?
I do not. I have one in my phone of me standing. Well, actually, I do actually here. And I have a picture in my
There it
phone,
is.
like I said, of me standing in front of that statue. It's just so much fun. That was such a classic wind-up that Marichal had. His leg way up in the heavens and his hand down, knuckle scraping the mound. Almost, he was so extended.
There was another incident early on. I think we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. The Giant games, when they moved to Frisco, or San Francisco, sorry.
Uh-oh.
Channel 13 covered the Giants when they played the Pirates and the Cardinals. This might have been 1959, and Raymond Monzant got into one of these situations similar to what Marichal did, and it ensued into almost a riot at Forbes Field. And I still see Mays coming out and tackling Cepeda. It eventually stopped, but there has been situations like that. And you mentioned the Latin temper, but Marichal, for those of us that have met him several times in Cooperstown, and he did work in the school district that I taught at for many years. What a gentleman.
Yes.
What a gentleman. I remember that picture was taken. I think it was that afternoon. He was signing, making some money, and a Little League team from Inwood, up in Manhattan, was in the street. He stopped the signing. He went over to those kids, took pictures, spoke to them. A real gentleman. I mean, he grew into a wonderful individual. And like Perry said, that was just a reaction. If he didn't have the bat in his hands, maybe he would have knocked them down, but he had a weapon. That was it.
Well, in the heat of the moment, no matter what ethnicity you are, you're going to say things you don't mean, do things you don't mean. And in 1969, whether it was Marichal or Tom Seaver with the Cy Young, Marichal actually, I believe, should have won it.
Well, it's like, that's why the vote wasn't unanimous either, right? Like some people, it's usually not. People think Seaver was the best pitcher one year, or Koufax, or Gibson, or Marichal, but the majority always went against him, it seemed.
Oh, by the way, the Cy Young Award for the first 10 years had only one winner. So,
Right. 67, I think.
And Don Newcomb was the first winner, and there wasn't another black winner for another some odd years.
Hey, John, I'm sorry, John, as Steve said,
Light of Blue in 1971.
we have met Marichal many times in Cooperstown. And, some of the guys dressed as schlubs, and he was always debonair, very, very soft-spoken, smiling, and always dressed to the nines and baseball royalty. Really was.
Yeah.
Yes.
To this day.
John, your
Very
book,
well kept.
Your book is a moral story for today. You really are get national publicity on this.
Well, thanks. Like I said, it's heartwarming to me today to be able to talk about this story of these guys transcending the rivalry, their differences, all the personal anguish they are feeling, and then this moment of rage to be able to forgive one another and reconcile and become friends. I mean, it's a heartwarming story. We need more of these right now.
Yes.
John, how would you compare this to the different sport, but the Kermit Washington Rudy Tomjanovich fight?
You'll have to ask Tom or John Feinstein that question. I'm not a basketball fan.
Fred Cohn, you're up.
Did Marichal invite Roseboro to attend his induction at the hall?
Oh, yeah. It was the whole family.
I can't remember. I
Definitely.
don't think the Roseboro family was there actually. But I can't remember. It's been a while since this book came out. And I'm embarrassed now. I don't remember if they were there. I guess I'd be surprised if they weren't, but I know John did thank him personally.
Did you discuss with Marichal anything about the 16th inning game, the feelings he had about it against Warren Spahn?
Again, I didn't get into that. I mentioned that in my book, but Jim Kaplan did a whole book on that game. And so I figured that territory had already been covered. So I focused more on Marshall's relationship with Roseboro. However, I will just say this. I must editorialize. These guys picked 16 innings, right? And they threw over 240 pitches or something like that. And Warren Spahn is getting on in years. And Kevin Cash doesn't let Snell pitch 6 innings in the World Series. Come on.
Maybe starting pitchers today.
John, what was Juan's reaction to your book?
I don't know. I haven't heard from him since. So I don't know.
Well, Steve has his email.
Yeah.
So does Gary. I just took the original, so I got his autograph and made a copy for Gary. Gary, you don't need that. I'll make a copy for you.
Here's an absolute. Can anybody hear me? I don't even know if it's getting.
Yeah,
Yes, we hear you.
Everybody hears you, Hall.
On the evening of that day, I mean, if you ask the group, where were you the day that Juan Marichal whacked Johnny Roseboro? I know where I was. And the only interesting part about it, I was in a place called Somerton, South Carolina. I was heading down with a group of fraternity brothers. We were going to catch a plane, a puddle jumper out of West Palm Beach, and we stopped for the night in Somerton, South Carolina, and we turned on the news. And 1965 is another century, of course, and the lead story on the news in Somerton, South Carolina was that ball. And I was the only Giants fan in the group. There were about 5 of us. And so everybody's looking at me to take sides. I, of course, took sides. I mean, I was a kid. But that's where I was. I don't know if anybody else can remember where they were on that day, but that's how I remember that, in Somerton, South Carolina. And that was the lead story on whatever news we were watching out of a motel in South Carolina.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the game of the week, I'm not sure if that game was on a Saturday or a Sunday, but that game was on
Saturday. Sunday?
Sunday.
It was a Sunday game.
Coming back from Yosemite.
It was Sunday, yes.
Okay.
I'll listen.
And
Last game of the weekend.
The games then weren't, so it wasn't broadcast in San Francisco. It was shown in Los Angeles.
That's right.
And they only had 4 cameras. So there was no camera on Marichal at the moment he hit Roseboro. So, the camera followed the pitch in from Koufax on the mound to the plate, and then the ball back to Koufax. So the camera was on Koufax when Marichal hit Roseboro. Then, of course, they showed the brawl that followed. But get this. It was shown on the news, that evening on the news. And then Major League Baseball asked the Los Angeles TV station, to erase the tape because it was bad for people to watch that. And they did. So the television station footage of that event does not exist anymore.
Wow.
John, do you know Jonathan Eig?
Sure, yeah. He blurbed one of my books for me.
Yeah, he's written some. He was a camper of mine when I had my day camp. He's written some wonderful books too. Yeah, I think he was one of the guys that critiqued this one.
I love the Ali book he did, the biography. He's working on a biography of Martin Luther King
Martin Luther
Jr. right
King,
now.
right.
And I asked him, now, are you able to find any new material on King? And he said, oh, yeah. So I'm really looking forward to reading that one when it comes out.
The Jackie Robinson book was good, the Gehrig book. Ali, unfortunately, he was supposed to interview him once, went to the home, and it wasn't a good day for Ali, so he spoke to the wife and the daughter. And
Yeah.
the rest of great book.
We actually, I wrote a book about Hank Greenberg, the hero of heroes. So
Yes.
the definitive biography of Hank Greenberg. Anyway, John had me speak to his synagogue's men's club down in Chicago at a place called Mort's Barbecue for the Perplexed. It's in Lincoln Park. It was really fun. So yeah, John's a great guy and a wonderful writer.
Terrific, man.
Speaking about Hank, he played on the same 8th grade as my father, and the game went into overtime, and my pop sank a foul shot to win the championship in the PSAL. So Hank Greenberg and my father actually reminisced at the 1980.
Jim Weber, do you have a question, Jim Weber? Jim, I saw your thing light up. Did you have a question? We can't see your face, Jim.
All right, his mic's not on, not working.
Okay,
Mic's not on.
so-
Anybody else?
Mars, I just heard your comment, and you were saying, was that basketball that they were playing, your father and Hank Greenberg?
It was in the 8th grade, and the game went into overtime, and my pop sank the winning field goal. He was the guard. Hank Greenberg was the center, and my pop was in the New York Times. He spelled his name.
Boy, that's fantastic. What a great story. And to have bested Greenberg, because Greenberg, of course, was a great basketball player. He was tall. He was 6'4" at a time when the average guy was like 5'10". And he thought about playing professional basketball, but when he looked at baseball and basketball and which one seemed to have the better future for him, he decided to go to baseball, figured he could make more money with that. And certainly had tremendous success. But I always wonder what would have happened if he'd pursued basketball. I'm sure, with his competitiveness and his size and his work ethic, he would have been a great basketball player too.
The major in the last few games.
Mars, you really got to do something with your mic.
Yeah, Mark.
They didn't want to pitch to Hank Greenberg in the last few games because he was Jewish, and they didn't want him to break Babe Ruth's record.
Well, I cover that in my book, and actually, there were some pitchers who were grooving him pitches and catchers who was telling him what was coming because there were some rooting for him. So yes, there were some pitchers not pitching to him because he was Jewish, but there was more to it than that. And I go into that in depth in my book.
John, isn't it true that the Roseboro family asked Marichal to give the eulogy at John's funeral?
That's correct.
Yes. Matter of fact, he was an honorary pallbearer, and he gave one of the eulogies, and that's how I end the book. And as you can imagine, it's a tearjerker.
John, what's the name of the Greenberg book? What's the name of the Greenberg book?
It is Hank. I wish I had a copy right here, but it's
Sure.
Hank Greenberg, Hero of Heroes.
Okay.
Matter of fact,
Got it. I got it. Don't worry about it.
Hey, guys, I got something to show you.
There we go.
George.
Hank Greenberg.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, I have that one. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Another one.
George, go ahead. George.
Okay. When the Expos were playing in Park Jarry for a year or two, my two brothers and I, with wives, those who had them, went up there to see the Giants play, and we was, it was a minor league park, so you can get close to the field. Well, Mays and the other stars walked by, never came close to the stands, but Gary Thomason did. That's with my brother. Charlie Fox was the manager, and one guy who stood out because he was a star was the guy we're talking about.
Marichal. Nice picture.
He's
Yeah.
married my wife, and my two brothers.
Oh, nice.
This is, can you recognize who that is other than me?
Not clear.
I
It's too small.
can't. Yeah,
Yeah.
too blurry.
He's a very mysterious giant.
Ron Bryant.
Ron Bryant.
Right. He had
Good
a
job, Gary.
Well, yeah, he
Where's
went
the
to,
bear?
he went
Beat
something like
Rich
20
Rogers to the answer.
Sorry, Rich.
Teddy bear.
It's all right. You beat me to it.
Great pictures.
And that's I guess that's Gary Thomason.
Are those Polaroids?
These were, yeah, they're little, they're very small little pictures.
Amazing.
One guy who came and talked to us for about 25 minutes was the infielder Phillips, if you remember who he was.
Oh, yeah.
Mike Phillips.
Mike
That's correct.
Phillips. He was telling us how he had a double down the line the night before the previous game. But Marichal stood out because how friendly he was and how indulging, you know. So
Yeah.
he's a class act.
Anybody else have a question for John?
I have one more. Did Marichal ever talk to you about how he developed his kick? I've never seen a kick like that. I'm surprised he didn't fall down on the mound.
He didn't. I didn't ask him about that. I wish I had now that I think of it. He must have had incredible balance, don't you think? I mean, to be able to
Unbelievable.
go way up like that. I mean, every pitcher's got to have good balance, of course, but to be able to go that high and then come down, I mean, he came down with such force. So that was impressive.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't affect his
problems later
didn't
on.
affect like his pickoff moves and stuff. There was another pitcher. Some of the older guys may remember Vinegar Bent Mizell.
Oh, yeah.
High leg kick. I remember a game, again, one of those TV games. Mays walks, steals second, steals third, no throws, and comes home on a wild pitch. Vinegar Bent Mizell.
Who won that pitch a no-hitter and lost?
Could be, you're right.
Right.
Marichal,
In for the 62 Mets. He started the season with them.
Right.
Mizell?
It
Yeah.
is.
He was an original Met
Right. He was an original Met.
with Richie Ashford.
Know your stuff. That's impressive.
Marichal high kick eventually led to his undoing because he's back pain, and that's why he was out for 1 month. When 18 games in the 1962 season. Then when he came back and sacrificed, he got hit on the finger, which was World Series.
Yeah.
Remember that. That's a good one. Well,
Yeah, he only
everyone's-
pitched like 3 innings in the
Really
World
good.
Series, so they didn't have him for the World Series. So they should have won.
That was the game. That was the game. Don Larson beat the Yankees. Also, Doug Hiller, first grand slam by
Right,
National
yes.
League of Marshall Bridge.
Yes.
That's right. I think that was on Yom Kippur.
Yes. Yeah, game 4.
If they had Marichal the entire series,
They would have won.
Oh, yeah.
oh, they
A
would
lot of ifs. If it didn't rain, he could start his rotation over again. There's always an if in there, you know.
But we got 3
We got the
World
three.
Series, so
We
we'll take
won
them.
three out of 5, though. Now
We'll
it's
take
3
them.
out of 25, but it's
John,
3 out
I
of
got a hypothetical question for you. What if, the ear flaps were instituted back then? Would you think this would have happened?
Probably not.
I don't, who knows, but it certainly Roseboro could have thrown that ball back close to Marshall's head and got his attention. So ear flap or no, I think, we would have still had the same situation.
It might have ricocheted off his helmet and gone back and hit Roseboro.
Or the umpire.
Oh,
Like a
bonus
cartoon.
point. Who was that plate umpire? Anybody know?
Obviously.
Oh, man.
Shag
I wanna
Crawford.
say
Shag Crawford.
Okay.
Even the author has to look it up.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Shade Crawford.
She'll know. Barry knows.
Yes,
Barry
it
knows.
was definitely. And Doug Harvey was at third. And the other 2 umpires, I'm not familiar with very much.
Anybody
give it
else
to
want to say something before I have Perry say something for a minute?
John, obviously you're a Twins fan. What about writing a book about the Twins in the 60s? They had some really good teams. I mean, they could hit.
Yeah.
Jim Cott,
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, of course, 65, they had a wonderful team.
Right.
Got serious. But the season I've wanted to write about is 1969 because anybody remember who their manager was?
Billy Martin,
1969?
Billy Martin, yeah.
He made his debut, a managerial debut, and everything that happened in New York, we saw in Minneapolis that year. He punched out one of his top pitchers, so he had an argument with one of his Dave Boswell in a bar, and he was one. He taught Rod Crew how to steal homes. Rod Crew stole homes 7 times. He played Billy Ball. He introduced Billy Ball, and they had a great season. Won more games than they had in the past. They brought in more fans, and yet the owner hated him. And so it was because of his conflict with the owner, Calvin Griffith, that he got fired at the end of the season. So it was like all the ingredients that we saw play out in New York later with George Steinbrenner were there in 1969 with Billy Martin and the Twins. So anyway, that's a team I want to write about, but I haven't.
Was he on the bottle back then?
Billy Martin?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He was on the bottle when he played for the Oakland Oaks.
I don't think he
Hey,
ever.
John, you're a Twins fan. This might be the
Yes.
Senators, might be a year or two before they got there. But they had some heavy-duty home run hitters. And one of the headlines, one of the games that they hit a lot of home runs was the Salk attack is back. Salk, like the Jonas Salk. What do the initials stand for? SALK. All players for the Senators or Twins.
A is
Seaver,
for Al. A is
Steve
for Allison.
Steve Allison, Lemon, and Killebrew.
Killebrew.
Good job, Jay.
Say it again, please.
The Salk
It's Roy
attack is
Severs,
back.
Bob Allison, Lemon, and Killebrew. Killebrew.
My closing statement here is to employ all members of our club to write the Giants to rename the park Willie Mays Field Miracle Park.
Give it up. It's not going to happen. There's no money in it.
The address of the park.
How cynical of you.
Willie Mays has a big trophy. Come on. Enough.
Before we conclude tonight, Perry, you wanted to say something about it?
Yes, briefly. It is not my habit to badmouth anybody or cast aspersions on people unfairly, but several months ago, I think everybody here got an email offered to purchase a baseball from a fellow named John Baker, who said that it had been signed by every member of the 1954 New York Giants. So after having a text conversation with him, I agreed to pay $1,200 for the baseball. And the upshot of that is that he changed the goalposts midway after I'd already sent him an initial payment of $600. He then decided to hold the ball hostage for $300 more than we had agreed to before I sent him the baseball. And at that point, I just asked him simply to send my $600 back, which to his credit, he did. But then today, I got another text from him offering me the baseball again for the original price of $1,200, which I found very suspect. And I told him so, told him that he was being unethical and untrustworthy and that I was not interested. So I just want to warn everybody, please, to be cautious if he approaches anybody with any similar deals. Also, after I had already sent him the $600, he waited 3 days to text me and tell me that it wasn't actually Leo DeRocher's signature, it was a stamp, which I was prepared to accept. I know that a lot of ball players who sign lots of autographs use stamps. And so I said, as long as the other signatures are authentic, I was happy for it. But I didn't think it was very, it was just hinky the way he went about it.
Was it authenticated, Perry?
I was just gonna say, you gotta come with
I didn't ask him to authenticate it. I decided to buy it on his word alone. And
good.
after a few back and forths by text, I was, like I said, getting a very uneasy feeling about it. And so when he offered today to resell it to me at the original price, and my first thought was, well, what happened? Because the reason he said he upped the price by $300 was because after I'd already sent him the $600, all of a sudden he started telling me that he had better offers. And I'm
Sure he
thinking,
did.
why is he offering it for sale to people when he's already sold it to me? So,
John.
you know,
All right.
so
John,
just-
we
John
can't thank,
Baker.
we
This
can't
is-
thank you enough. Again, if anybody's interested, John, they'll go to your website and get a signed copy of the book, correct?
Well,
John.
thanks everyone for having me. I
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Guys, John, you know, you're always welcome to any of our meetings as you're now on our list of email list. But next week we got George Greger who's here tonight. George, you want to quickly tell us what your book is for next week?
Yeah, well, it's
I'll give you a minute so you can just show everybody and then quickly tell us what it is, and we'll save everything for next week.
I'm an author without being a writer. Many years ago, on long flights to Hong Kong and Tokyo, and started writing baseball books in verse, epic poems. The first one was A Ride on the Mendoza Line. But
So
the fifth,
this one's going to be all about the Giant franchise, correct?
this is going to be From Coogan's Bluff to Baseball by the Bay.
All right, so everybody show up next week, hopefully, for our last
and
gig before Thanksgiving.
Mo Resner, who contributed photos from his DVD of the last game at the Polo Grounds, I've asked Mo, who I don't think signed in tonight, to participate because he's a part of Giants history. In fact, for many years, he was treated better by the Giants than he was by the Cubs. He waited 71 years for the Cubs to win. He grew up in the Bronx as I did. He grew up as a Cub fan, and I grew up as a Giant fan.
Right. So I want you to save your stories for next week, okay?
Yeah, we'll save it to the next week.
John, again, thank you so much.
Gary,
Thank you, guys.
Gary,
Thank you.
Yes.
Gary Leibowitz.
Excellent.
I want to say something to Perry Barber, who I've known for a long time. I have 3 or 4 of those 1954 New York Giant baseballs. I will give one to her as a gift.
Oh, that's very nice.
Oh my gosh.